And one of our favourite subjects on this channel is a DACT or BFM. How did the A model fare against, the F-15s, the Hornets at the time?
Oh yeah, it was a tough fight. You really, really had to fly a perfect A, because the TF-30 engines in the airplane were so underpowered. And so you had to be very aggressive in your maneuvering. You had to fly it exactly on the the edge of the piece of S curve. But it typically down lower with an F-15, so 15,000 feet and lower, you do pretty well because the Tomcat wings are, of course, straight out when you're pulling. And so you got a better wing surface area in a fight than an F-15 does, but he's got way better engines, way better equipment. I call the F-15 God's jet. I always do. And of course, the brand new F-15EX is out there, and that is, oh my gosh, they made a fly-by-wire. There's stuff on there. The thing goes over Mach 2. It is an amazing airplane. But I don't know that I ever won a 1v1 with an F-15. They take you up high, and you're not going to do real well up there. And so that airplane's pretty hard to fight in A model. Now, when I was at Oceana, I commanded a D squadron. Now, F-110s in the D, 220 knots, you could go into the vertical with that airplane. And we go fight F-15s at Langley, routinely kick their butt. Because by that time I had more than 3,000 hours in Tomcats, and they kind of thought, well, it's a Tomcat. They're used to A models because that's all they've seen. And the D is guys like, wow, how'd you do that? So we were way better matched. But of course, a really good pilot in a patch wearer in F-15 and a patch wearer in a Tomcat D model, that's a pretty even fight. The other airplanes that, they're pretty hard is an F-16 because all he has to do is just pull, and you can get inside him. But I have gunned F-16s before, because if you get the guy to pull on his limiter, I actually saw a guy in a turn, I'm coming down on him, and he pulls hard into me, and all of a sudden the airplane just goes whoop, whoop, and starts to arc because he had hit his AOA limiter. Yeah. And so he pulled a AOA limiter, and then the airplane just arcs right in front of me. It's like, wow. And you could actually see the airplane let go. And so if the pilot makes a mistake in the F-16 and yanks too hard, gets in the AOA limiter, he has to get out of that. Of course, he's got all the thrust in the world, and so he can accelerate out of that, and then he's back into you. But typically, F-16 is very hard, and it's so hard to see because nose on, it's just like a little dot. So that's pretty tough. The airplanes that I fought most of the time when I was training that were not blue airplanes like an F-15 or an F-16 were A4s and F5s. And the F5's a pretty good fight. He could disappear, but he was pretty evenly matched with a Tomcat A. An A4 could turn inside you. And so you didn't really want to get in a turning fight with an A4 unless you were extremely aggressive and you stayed in one circle with him, one circle fight. So nose to nose all the time, pulling really hard inside. And typically you've got your nose a lot farther down than him, which means you're losing more altitude than him. Almost every single fight with an A4, I get into a flat scissors with him. Because we both slowed down, and now we're both trying to get behind each other's sixes. And now we're just floating, and that's a bad place to be in a Tomcat. And typically you're not the only guy. So what we used to learn is if you get yourself treed there, think about a multi-bogey fight. Somebody's going to shoot you. But if it's just 1v1, that was just kind of fun. So Tomcat wasn't really good at turning, but it was very, very good in the vertical. So you had to preserve your energy to be able to use that vertical maneuver to come down on the other guy when he ran out of energy.
Yeah, so you mentioned the D there. So what was it like transitioning from the A to the D, and what were the upgrades for the jet? Obviously the engines, but if you can maybe share that with our viewers.
Yeah, the D model was upgraded in a couple of places. First one with the engines, we had GE F-110s. In military power, and I do this with my hands, in military power, the 110s had as much power as the TF-30s in afterburner. When you went into afterburner with the D, that was extra thrust. The airplane was heavier. The Tomcat B model, the F-14B, was an A with the new engine. So that's actually the sports car of the Tomcats, because the only weight added was the weight of the engine. In the Tomcat D model, you had an IRST, infrared search and track. You had a new radar, APG-71 radar over the AUG-9 radar in the A, which was very capable digital radar, the APG-71. You had the new engines, of course, and the heads-up display. You had a Hornet, a Super Hornet style heads-up display. very, very good heads-up display. So in learning how to fly the D model, I went out to VF 101 detachment at Miramar, learned how to fly the D, and it's kind of differences training. So, it flies kind of like a Tomcat, except there's a heck of a lot more thrust. And so you didn't take off an afterburner. You didn't do catapults in afterburner, because if you lose an engine right on takeoff, the airplane's going to depart. You can't. We, in fact, would practice in simulators. You cannot stop the adverse yaw crash that you're going to have if one of the burners blows out. And so you took off in military, and you had to be very careful because you overspeed the gear. 250 knots is gear speed. And in the D model, if you take off and you're a little delayed putting the gear up without bringing the throttles back, even for military, you could overspeed the gear really fast. So the acceleration of the airplane, you had to get really used to that. Other than that, and the radar worked really good. And there were multifunctional displays in the cockpit now instead of the steam gauges. And so now the steam gauges, since the HUD was up there and the multifunction displays are up there, that's the first time I learned how to inky dink my way through the buttons in a display. And the steam gauges were down by your left knee. So in case you lost your HUD and the digital displays, you had to transition your scan down to above your left knee and be able to look at the small altimeter and things like that. But that was rare. The funny thing is, when I first started flying the Tomcat D model in the landing pattern, I would turn the HUD down because I didn't want to be a HUD cripple, because they call it a HUD cripple. Yeah. And so I turned the HUD down, and so eventually I go, "You idiot, turn the HUD up because you could fly up the HUD." And it's very precise, and it was absolutely wonderful. When I learned how to fly the Super Hornet 8 years later, same HUD, same exact HUD.
Wow.
Identical HUD. So when I took off the first time in a Super Hornet in 2006 and looked through the front of the airplane, pointy nose, same HUD, guy in the back seat, I thought I was in a Tomcat D model again. So it's really interesting because the HUD was the same. So the D with that HUD, those engines, the IRST, and then the new radar made it a really awesome fighter. And of course, before the D model, we had put the lantern pod on the airplane in the mid 90s or so, a very, very, very precise bomber, because the reticle on the lantern pod was like a cross with an opening in the middle and a 2 mil dot right in the center. And that 2 mil dot you could put on the door frame of the building, and the bomb would go into that door. So the precision of the lantern pod was because the little dot that you had as the reticle, the radar intercept officer could put that dot right where he wanted to go, and the bomb would go very, to exactly the right place. That's what made it such a precise bomber over the Hornet with the AT FLIR or the FLIR pods that they used, because their reticle was actually a diamond, so it was difficult to get the target, in the right place in the diamond and have the bomb hit.